US President Donald Trump is continuing his personal attacks on the anchors of the American breakfast TV show Morning Joe. He lashed out at Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski on Twitter overnight, referring to them as crazy Joe Scarborough and dumb as a rock Mika.
Now, it follows widespread condemnation for his earlier tweets, calling Ms Brzezinski crazy and saying she was bleeding badly from a facelift. Well, for more on this and other US political news, we're joined by Professor Edward Blakely, a former White House staffer for both Republican and Democratic presidents and now at the University of Sydney. Good morning to you. And we do note that you have just returned from the United States.
I shouldn't say off the boat, off the plane.
Off the plane, exactly, off the
Politically
plane.
correct.
And I don't know that you're ever fresh after that flight either, are you?
Oh, well, it's 14 interesting hours.
And a lot happens in that time, including
during that time of the year, we've obviously had a lot of Donald Trump's been heavily involved with Twitter.
Yes.
Just some of the ones that he's mentioned. Obviously, he's having a go at the media again. We shouldn't be surprised by that.
No.
What do you make, though, of his relentless criticism, particularly of the MSNBC hosts?
Well, his book says discredit your enemy. That's what his MO is, to discredit these people. Then his people look for an alternate source. That will be provided through their media channels, including Fox. So discredit one, build up another one. But this does not build America. He's supposed to be the President of the United States, not some portion of the United States, not the people who like him or dislike him, but the entire United States. What I observed when I was in the States, a lot of what you might call progressive media is rising to the bait. There's a new channel called Democracy Now! And these things, and particularly at the local level in California where I spent a lot of time, these things are rising. So it's kind of, if he hits them, a whole group of new people come out trying to defend not just democracy, but defend themselves against these attacks.
So do we just see more of the same, though, from President Trump as he finds more voices of opposition there?
Well, there's a problem here. President Trump has to use the White House. That's an institution. And the more he drifts away from that, the less the presidency can involve itself in policymaking. We've seen that very recently with 4 senators saying this is unpresidential. Those same senators are going to have to vote on his legislation. So there's a pushback beginning in the Congress and even in his immediate circle. Let's not forget that Tillotson, his Secretary of State, took after the White House on the things they were doing that impeded his operation. So I think we're getting new signals. And the more he does it, the firmer those signals are that he's not presidential.
What does this say of, or is there a threat to American democracy where he's actively trying to undermine the legitimacy of the Fourth Estate?
Yes, and clearly this is what every dictator does. This is the first sign. You undermine all the voices that are against you, you set up your own puppets and puppet media, and you do the kinds of things that make people insecure about where they are in the democracy. And that's happening now.
You've just referred to him as a dictator.
That wasn't a slip of the tongue, because these are the movements of a dictator. And one has to be careful that these movements are cut off early, and I think that's what the senators are trying to do. They've seen this before. They know history, and they're trying to cut this off. And by the way, I think some members of his cabinet feel the same way.
So are we actually actively seeing signs that there are efforts to curb or alter President Trump's efforts, in particular in terms of recent efforts to look at sanctions on Russia and how they're carried out, also the military budget to ensure that we're seeing a more substantial amount of funding towards the military budget, and even with the investigation, the FBI investigation, given a wider net being cast there?
Well, what's beginning to happen is the deep state is beginning to come out. People talked about this for some time. It seemed fairly frivolous vocabulary. But now, when I was in the States, I had a feeling that there are people, alternate voices within the government, who are speaking out, particularly in the State Department, other departments, energy, and so on, who are worried about the future of the country. And rather than just quitting, they're in open defiance.
So how then does a government function with that open defiance?
Well, the government is not functioning. Let's be clear here. Let's take the ban. The recent ban came in effect the day before yesterday. The State Department officer, who's already harassed about visas and so on, just says, hey, look, I'll just let all these people through and let them take care of it at the airport. That's one way of handling it. Another way of handling these things is to pick on people who are important and not let them in, so the press picks that up. I think both those things are going to start happening. So they'll let in somebody who shouldn't have been let in, but then they'll pick on somebody like a diplomat, and that's happened twice already, who has a legitimate reason for being in the country. The people who run the government here in Australia and everywhere have a lot to say about how it looks, how it appears, and what it does.
Now, what about this issue on the Electoral Commission? And some 20 states now saying, no, we are not going to give over details of the electoral roll.
Well, I think these states are not defined. They are just representing. They're representing the Constitution of the United States, which protects the right of every individual voter.
Let's just examine exactly what they want, what the letter of demand that the Commission has sent to every state, essentially asking for the full voter roll, and they'll make this available to the public. Information such as full names, addresses, birth dates, political party, and their social security numbers.
Doesn't that sound very dangerous? Because if that gets in the hands of the wrong people who can manipulate the voter roll, that could be very dangerous. You show up to vote and all of a sudden your name's not there. Or you get phone calls that you didn't solicit, because that information could lead to the robocalls being much more effective, very pinpointed. Talking about fake news, what happens if I have your voter roll, know how you voted last time, and send you a piece of fake news about pro or con on a piece of legislation? This is directly aimed at controlling the voters.
So, I mean, does this open up Pandora's box potentially?
Well, Pandora's box is open. The question is, who moves first? While I was there were a number of calls for Republican senators to step forward. Now, Lindsey Graham is on that track, and other senators, McCain, are beginning to step forward and say, either we have to do something about the current president or do workarounds that are very, very big. We have in the background, of course, these investigations going on. I don't know if you heard, but there is now a story that was in the Wall Street Journal about a connection between a hacker, an American hacker, the Russians, and Flynn. So the noose is getting tighter. Now the president did not take after this story, interestingly enough, because this will start moving people in that direction and it'll uncover more.
Meanwhile, Ed, the President insists he is making changes. As far as legislation is concerned, though, let's look at the changes to the Healthcare Act. Where is that at? Because he's clearly facing criticism from within his own party as well.
Oh, he's criticizing the act. Remember, he thought it was mean-spirited. So his criticism from his own party is related to the fact that he is not providing a course of action, what Obama tried to do. All right, let's put these things together. I'll work with the Republicans if they'll work with me. He's saying, look, let's tinker this and shove it down their throats. That's not going to work, because the Republican senators and congressmen in about a year and a half have to go out. There have been no hearings on this bill. No one really knows what's in it. No doctors, no one else knows what's in it. So if you get the medical establishment offside, you get the healthcare establishment offside, you get the insurance industry offside, the money for those people's election comes from those industries. So a weak and endangered Republican who goes out against a decent Democrat may have a hard time. It seems to me what the Democrats' strategy is at this moment is let them put out the worst possible bill, and we'll fake news it. We'll make it even worse. Because since nobody really knows what's in it, why don't we say all these very bad things? And there are bad enough things in it already. For example, most people will lose, aged people will lose the very care they're getting now. Think of the ramifications that on their sons and daughters who are free of taking care of their parents and senior citizen facilities and the like. Boy, it couldn't be worse. And the last thing he said is repeal Obamacare, and then we'll wait to see what we can do. Wow.
Very murky business indeed. Professor Ed Blakely, wonderful to have you with us. Thank you very much.
I'm glad to be back.
Thank you.